What if I told you that everything you learned about the perfect jigging motion is probably scaring more fish than it attracts? It sounds crazy, right? We're all taught to be active, to give that lure life. But today, we're diving deep into why your jigging game might feel completely robotic, unnatural, and downright terrifying to the fish you're trying to catch. I promise you, by the end of this video, you'll understand what the fish actually sees and feels, not what we anglers think it sees. It's often a tiny, overlooked detail that makes the difference between a full live well and going home empty-handed, wondering what you did wrong. So let me ask you this before we start. Do you believe a sharp, aggressive jig is always the best way to get a reaction? Let me know in the comments, and let's see if you change your mind in the next 20 minutes. Let's be honest, we all learn it from day one. You get on the ice or in the boat, and someone you trust shows you that classic lift and drop motion. You practice it until it becomes pure muscle memory. The common thinking, passed down for generations, is that you need to be aggressive to grab a fish's attention from a distance. Make a scene down there, pop that jig hard, let it flutter down fast. We've been told this for decades, and it's become gospel for many. It's what our dads did, and their dads before them. And look, it works. Sometimes. That's the problem. It works just often enough that we rarely stop to ask the most important question. What does this chaotic rhythmic dance actually look like to a wary walleye or a finicky perch swimming just a few feet away? We're about to find out. First, let's talk about the human fallacy. We are apex predators who live on land. Our instincts are built around sight, sound, and aggressive movements. We see something, we pursue it. So when we pick up a fishing rod, we translate that same aggressive instinct into our jigging motion. We think a hard, fast snap of the rod tip is what signals food to a fish. But underwater, the rules are completely different. Fish operate in a world of subtlety, vibration, and caution. What we perceive as an attractive and lively movement can be interpreted by a fish as a spastic, unnatural threat. Imagine a small bait fish. It doesn't move in a perfect 1-2-3 rhythm. It darts, it pauses, it hovers, it sinks slowly. Our mechanical, repetitive jigging doesn't mimic this at all. It mimics a human trying to fish, and the fish know it. Now consider the underwater soundscape. We think of the lake as a quiet place, but it's not. Sound travels much faster and farther in water. Every time you sharply snap your jig up, you're not just moving the lure. You're creating a distinct, sharp sound profile. Your line cutting through the water, the jig itself displacing water, it all creates a thump or a whistle that is completely alien to the natural environment. Think of a tiny shrimp or a minnow. Their movements are largely silent or produce very subtle organic sounds. Your aggressive jigging, on the other hand, is like someone clapping their hands loudly in a quiet library. It might get attention, sure, but is it the right kind of attention? For a cautious predator, that loud, unnatural noise is a red flag. It signals something is wrong, something is out of place. It screams danger, not dinner. Let's move on to the visual overload. Many modern jigs are designed with bright colors, flashy tape, and glowing paint. The idea is to make them highly visible, and when you combine these flashy lures with a fast, aggressive ripping motion, you create an intense strobing visual effect. To our eyes above the water, it looks great. But put yourself in the fish's position, in murky, low-light conditions. A natural bait fish might have a subtle flash as it turns, but it's fleeting and soft. Your jig, on the other hand, is like a disco ball having a seizure. This rapid, intense flashing isn't a trigger. It's a deterrent. It's too much information, too fast. A predator's brain is wired to lock onto a target, but when that target is blinking and jerking erratically, it can be confusing and even intimidating. It doesn't look like a wounded easy meal, it looks like a glitch in the matrix. Let's break down the rhythm of nature versus the rhythm of a human hand. This is a critical point. When you're out there jigging, you fall into a rhythm without even realizing it. Lift for 1 second, drop for 2, lift, drop. It becomes a subconscious, metronome-like beat. but absolutely nothing in nature moves with such perfect mechanical consistency. A real water bug, a leech, or a minnow has an erratic, unpredictable pattern. It might stay still for 10 seconds, then give a tiny flick, then drift for 5 seconds. This randomness is the signature of life. Your perfect rhythm is the signature of an artificial object controlled by a human. Fish, especially older, wiser fish, have survived by recognizing patterns. When they sense a pattern that is too perfect, too consistent, their internal alarm bells go off. They've learned that perfect patterns often come with a hook attached. We also need to ask, what are we actually trying to imitate? Most anglers would say a dying minnow, but we've developed a cartoonish idea of what that looks like. We picture a fish spasming wildly, jerking up and down. That's what we try to replicate with those hard snaps of the rod. But have you ever actually watched a small fish that is injured or dying? It doesn't do that. It will often struggle for a moment, and then it will go listless. It will sink slowly, almost helplessly. It might give a weak, trembling flick of its tail. Its movements are characterized by weakness and gravity taking over. The most attractive-looking meal for a predator is one that requires the least amount of energy to catch. Your super-aggressive, high-energy jigging presentation signals the exact opposite of an easy meal. It looks like a healthy, strong creature that would require a chase. Let's correct the dying minnow myth once and for all. The most crucial part of a dying minnow's dance is the fall and the pause. After a brief struggle, it hangs in the water column or slowly drifts downward. It's in this moment of vulnerability that predators strike. Yet this is the part of the presentation that most anglers rush through. We snap the jig up and then we immediately get ready for the next snap. We're so focused on the action part of the jig that we forget that the inaction is where the magic happens. The strike almost always comes when the jig is falling, or even more often when it's sitting completely still on the bottom or suspended after a fall. Your constant active jigging might be pulling the lure away from the fish right as it decides to commit. You're interrupting the most critical moment of the hunt. Now for something you can't see. Pressure waves. A fish's most important sensory organ is often its lateral line. It's a system of nerves that runs along its body, detecting movement and vibrations in the water. It's how they feel their environment. Every time your jig moves, it pushes water and creates a pressure wave, like the wake from a boat. A small, natural creature creates a very subtle, soft pressure wave. A slow lift and a gentle flutter on the fall produces a signature that mimics this, but a hard, fast rip of the rod creates a sharp, powerful pressure wave. To a fish's lateral line, this doesn't feel like a minnow. It feels like a much larger, more aggressive creature charging at it. It's the equivalent of someone suddenly shouting in your ear. The natural reaction is not to eat it, but to flee from it. One of the biggest mistakes is the sin of uniformity. Even if you're trying to be less aggressive, chances are you're still being too repetitive. Imagine this scenario. You drop your jig down, you lift it 12 inches and let it fall. Then you do it again and again. Every lift is 12 inches. Every drop is the same speed. This uniformity is a dead giveaway. Real prey is unpredictable. On your next trip, try this. On the first lift, raise the jig just 3 inches and let it fall. On the next, rip it up 2 feet and let it flutter down. Then, let it sit dead still for 15 seconds. Then, just shake the rod tip so the jig quivers in place without moving up or down. By constantly varying the height, speed, and rhythm of your jigging motion, you break the artificial pattern. You're introducing a chaos that is much more aligned with how real, living things behave underwater. Let's talk more about ignoring the pause. Seriously, this is probably the single most important concept in all of jigging. We are action-oriented beings. We feel like if we aren't moving the rod, we aren't fishing. The truth is the exact opposite. The pause is when a fish inspects the lure. The pause is when they decide to bite. After you lift your jig and let it fall, it will often settle on the bottom or come to rest. Leave it there. Count to 5. Count to 10. Sometimes even count to 30. This extended pause does 2 things. First, it gives a hesitant fish time to approach and commit. Second, it makes your lure seem like a truly stunned or dead creature, an opportunity too easy to pass up. Most bites on a jig happen during this dead stick or pause phase. If you are constantly in motion, you are literally moving the lure away from fish that are trying to eat it. Think about something as simple as your fishing line. If you're using a stiff monofilament or fluorocarbon line that has been on your reel for a while, it has line memory. It comes off the spool in coils. When your jig is underwater, those coils can create a subtle, unnatural spring-like action. Even when you think your jig is sitting perfectly still on the bottom, the stored energy in the coiled line can cause it to twitch, or slowly rotate in a way that just isn't natural. This is why using a high-quality, low-memory line or even a super supple braided line with a leader is so crucial. Your line is the direct connection to the lure, and if it's fighting you and introducing its own artificial movements, your entire presentation is compromised before you even make your first lift. It's a small detail, but it can make a world of difference in appearing natural. We need to understand the rod tip telegraph. What your hand does is not what the lure does. A 6-inch snap of your wrist can translate to a 3-foot jump of the lure underwater, especially in deep water with some line stretch. We often overestimate how much input is needed. The best jigging anglers barely seem to move at all. Their movements are small, subtle, and precise. They use their wrist, not their whole arm. They understand that the rod is a tool to transmit tiny signals. Try this. Watch your rod tip. Try to make it quiver just a fraction of an inch. That tiny, almost imperceptible shake is often all it takes to make the feathers or plastic on your jig breathe and pulse in a lifelike way. This is far more natural than the violent jerks that most people employ. You are not trying to ring a bell, you are trying to whisper to the fish. Let's really try to adopt a fish's perspective. A fish's brain is primarily focused on two things: finding food and avoiding being food. That's it. They live in a constant state of alert. Their survival depends on correctly identifying threats and opportunities. When something new enters their world, like your jig, they assess it with all their senses. They see its shape and color. They feel its vibration with their lateral line. They might even smell or taste it. If any one of these signals seems off or unnatural, their defense instincts take over. A movement that's too fast, a vibration that's too strong, a rhythm that's too perfect. These are all triggers for caution, not aggression. Your goal as an angler is to make your lure pass every single one of these sensory tests. It needs to look, feel, and act like a safe, easy meal. There's a fine line between an attack trigger and a flee trigger. Sometimes an aggressive rip can trigger a reaction strike out of pure predatory instinct. This is especially true with aggressive fish in warm water, but far more often, especially with neutral or negative fish in cold water, that same aggressive rip triggers a flight response. The fish doesn't see food, it sees a threat. It's crucial to understand the mood of the fish and the conditions. In cold water, a fish's metabolism is slow. They aren't going to waste energy chasing something that looks like it will put up a fight. They want the easiest possible meal. A jig that is barely moving, quivering on the bottom, or sinking slowly is broadcasting the message, "I am weak and helpless." That is a powerful attack trigger. Your fast, aggressive jig is broadcasting, "I am strong and erratic, you might have to work for this." That's a flee trigger. Let's imagine a case study. Two anglers are ice fishing over the same school of perch. Angler A is using the classic, aggressive rip and fall technique. He snaps the rod up 1.5 feet, then lets the jig slam back to the bottom. He's getting their attention, he sees them on his flasher, but they come in, look, and then fade away. Angler B is doing something different. He drops his jig to the bottom and just lets it sit. After 10 seconds, he lifts it ever so slowly, just 3 inches off the bottom. Then he holds it perfectly still. He then just barely shakes his rod tip, making the jig tremble. The perch on his flasher moves in slowly, inspects the quivering lure, and inhales it. Angler B understands that for these neutral fish, less is more. He's not trying to force a bite. He's convincing them the meal is safe and easy. You absolutely cannot ignore how water temperature changes everything. In the warmth of summer, a bass or a pike might chase down a fast-moving lure with explosive energy. Their metabolism is high, and they are feeding aggressively. In this scenario, a more active jigging style can work, but take that same technique to the dead of winter, under the ice. The water is 35 degrees. That same fish is now incredibly lethargic. Its movements are slow and deliberate. It needs to conserve energy. It will not chase a meal. You have to put the meal right in its face and keep it there. Your jigging cadence must match the energy level of the fish. In cold water, that means slowing everything down. Your lifts are shorter, your falls are slower, and your pauses are much, much longer. Using a summer technique in winter is one of the most common reasons anglers fail on the ice. It's also possible you are using the wrong jig for the wrong action. Not all jigs are created equal. A heavy, compact tungsten jig is designed to get to the bottom fast. It's great for deep water and for creating a sharp, vertical jigging action. But if you try to make it look like a slow, dying minnow, it will fail. It just falls too fast. On the other hand, a jig with a wider profile, or one with a soft plastic that adds drag, is designed for a slower, spiraling fall. If you try to rip this jig aggressively, it won't look right either. It will just spin and cartwheel unnaturally. You have to match your lure to the presentation you're trying to achieve. If you want a slow, subtle presentation, choose a lure that is designed to fall slowly and hang in the water column. Don't try to force a lure to do something it wasn't built for. This leads to the illusion of control. We sit in our boat or on our bucket and we think we know exactly what our lure is doing 30 feet below. We feel the thump as it hits bottom and we feel the weight as we lift it. But there are so many variables we don't account for. Underwater currents can be pushing your line and making the lure drift or swing in an unnatural arc. The stretch in your line can be absorbing the subtle movements you're trying to impart. Even the way your knot is tied can affect how the jig hangs and moves. The only way to truly know is to test it. Drop your jig in shallow, clear water near the shore or next to the boat. Practice different movements and watch exactly how the lure responds. You will likely be shocked at how large a rod movement is needed for some actions, and how tiny a movement is needed for others. If you ever want a masterclass in natural presentation, use live bait. Put a live minnow on a hook and just watch what it does on your sonar or underwater camera. It doesn't perform a rhythmic dance. It sits still for long periods. Then it gives a little kick. Then it might swim up a few inches and just hang there. It is the definition of erratic and subtle. This is the gold standard you are trying to imitate with your artificial lure. The best jigging anglers in the world spend a lot of their time trying to do one thing. Make their artificial lure do absolutely nothing. They are masters of the dead stick and the subtle quiver. They know that the less they do, the more their lure looks like a real vulnerable creature. Live bait is the ultimate teacher, and its lesson is almost always to slow down and do less. Let me introduce you to your new secret weapon, the micro jiggle. This is an advanced yet simple technique that is deadly on finicky fish. After you've let your jig fall and it's either on the bottom or suspended instead of lifting it, you simply apply light, steady pressure to your rod and create a tremor. You're not lifting the jig's position, you are just vibrating it in place. You can do this by shaking your wrist or even by tapping your finger on the rod blank. This tiny high-frequency vibration is just enough to make any soft plastics or feathers on your jig breathe and pulse with life. To a fish staring at it from inches away, it looks like a living creature that is shivering or breathing. It's an incredibly subtle and natural trigger that can turn lookers into biters, especially when they've ignored every other presentation you've shown them. So, let's tie it all together into what we can call the natural pulse technique. It's a philosophy, not just a single retrieve. It starts with dropping your lure and letting it settle. Then, you wait. You give a long pause. Next, instead of a sharp rip, you give a slow 3 to 6 inch lift. At the top of the lift, you hold it for a second. Then, you control the fall, letting it flutter down on a semi-slack line, not just plummeting. Once it settles, you pause again. Maybe after that pause, you introduce a few seconds of the micro jiggle, then another long pause. The entire sequence is slow, deliberate, and most importantly, unpredictable. You are breaking the rhythm. You are mimicking weakness, not aggression. You are creating a presentation that feels real, sounds real, and looks like the easiest meal that fish will see all day. This is how you stop spooking them and start catching them. So, what is the big, game-changing takeaway from all of this? It's that our human instinct to be active, loud, and rhythmic is the exact opposite of what works in the subtle, cautious, and vibration-sensitive world that fish inhabit. We're essentially playing rock and roll at a classical music concert, wondering why no one is impressed. The real aha moment, the thing I hope you remember, is that you are not trying to attract a fish with a loud, flashy display. You are trying to deceive a fish into believing your lure is an easy, dying meal. And dying things do not have a perfect, metronome-like rhythm. This small shift in your mindset, from attracting to deceiving, will fundamentally change how you approach your jig. You'll slow down. You'll embrace the pause. You'll start thinking about the tiny 1-inch movements, not just the big 3-foot rips. And that will make all the difference. Thank you so much for sticking with me through this deep dive. If this blew your mind a little bit or challenged an old habit, do me a favor and hit that like button. And be sure to subscribe so you don't miss our next video where we break down another old school fishing rule. Now I want to hear from you. What is the one jigging habit you're going to try and break on your next trip out? Drop it in the comments below. Let's all learn from each other.